Hi everyone. Thank you all so much for joining us today. My name is Dorn. I'm a senior librarian at the Nutley Public Library, and we are welcoming Ronald and Valerie Negra to discuss Ron's recent book, Waves of Hope. And thank you all for checking out the presentation today. Ron and Valerie graciously are here to promote this book. And before we begin, I would just like to talk a little bit about Ron's history and family's history within Nutley Township. Ron, would you be able to describe a little bit more of your family's history in town?
Sure. My great-grandfather came to Nutley in 1907 and bought a home at 67 Harrison Street. It was a home with 14 acres. And then he was, for an immigrant guy, I don't know how he did all this, but the person that owned the property was a well-known builder in Nutley and developer in Nutley by the name of Lambert. And he owned a lot of property in town and buildings and things. And I guess his intention was that he was going to hold the mortgage for my grandfather. My grandfather put $50 down and he said he would hold the mortgage. And I think Mr. Lambert was thinking, well, he may not be able to carry this for long and I'd get the property back. At least that's what the history was that was passed down to me. Anyway, Grandpa decided, he went to the town hall and he decided he was going to try to subdivide the property, which he did. And the property became lots on Harrison Street and also on Nork Avenue. Nork Avenue didn't exist. It was just a dirt road. They actually made it a street. They called it Nork Avenue because people that started buying the lots were all from Nork. They were migrating to the country. So by 1910, he had no mortgage. He had zero mortgage. So my father was born in that house, 67 Harrison, and he grew up in that house. My grandparents lived at 57 Harrison, and then they built their own home on Nork Avenue, 18 Nork Avenue. So that's my father's family. My mother's family came in 1938 from Boston, and my grandfather was a fisherman and had a tragic accident while he was fishing, deep sea fishing, and everyone was lost on his boat in a storm, capsized. He was saved after a couple of weeks. They had a funeral for him and all that. Anyway, he showed up after swimming to an island and being rescued. So he could not go deep sea fishing anymore. He wouldn't do it. He was really afraid.
There was a lot of stuff.
So he came to Nutley and opened up a fish market at 187 Franklin Avenue. So that was my mother's entree to Nutley, 1938.
With the Lambert architecture, we have a book on Lambert's suburban architecture at Nutley, and it shows all the different houses that were designed. So I'll have to take a look share that book with you because you might recognize the houses through that. Yeah, it's called Lambert's Suburban Architecture.
Correct. That house was built in 1830. No one really, I don't think anyone knows about it. It's still standing. Been out of the family since 1960.
So let's talk a little bit about how this book came about. What was the inspiration of creating Waves of Hope?
The inspiration was, well, let me tell you how it came about. About 2.5 years ago, I was starting to go through many of my mother's things. She's very organized, and she has collected things over the years, but everything is in its place or boxed and sealed and labeled and all that. And I came across a box that said 1946, and it was sealed. And I said, okay, I opened it up, and I thought maybe it was letters from my father during the war, love letter thing. So I didn't want to delve into that. But she said, no, they're the letters from the families of the prisoners of war in World War II. And I said, okay, Mom, start at the beginning on this because I don't know anything about this. She never discussed it. So we started getting into that, and she started telling the story of what she did during the war. She got a shortwave radio and listened to the names of American flyer POWs, and wrote to the families to let the families know that their loved ones were alive. Mm-hmm. So as she was telling me this, I was thinking about, wow, what a great story this is. And it's a story that I want to document for our family, children and grandchildren, great-grandchildren, all of that. So I started doing that without her really knowing anything. I never told her what my my goal was, my mission was. And I would interview her 2 or 3 times a week, and she would give me more information. There's one thing about my mother. She's extremely honest and she's factual. So I knew right there I'd be getting, really solid information. So I took notes and I started putting it into the story. And I was interested in what was going on in Nutley and around her on December 7th, 1941. What was going on with the family? And then when the U.S. entered the war, what was that like? What was it like to be living there pregnant, which she was, married and pregnant, newlywed, not knowing if her husband was going to be with her much longer before he ended up going in the service. And what happened then during the war, and what went on with these families, like the emotions that these families went through, wondering if they'd ever see their loved ones again. So I put that into a story, and the purpose of it, my mission was to develop that story and have it printed at a printer for her 100th birthday. Her 100th birthday was November 13th, 2019. She was born in 1919. And that was it. So I had about 20 books printed up, and family came and friends to her celebration. And they started going through the book and telling me that this is a story that should be published. Mm-hmm. And that's really how it started. We happened to sit next to someone on a beach in Florida. Mm-hmm. And she asked Val what I was up to. And Val said, oh, he's upstairs in the room finishing this book. Yeah. She said, I'd like to read the manuscript. And I was very protective of this because it was really for my mother. I wanted the book to be very simple mm-hmm. and short, because I don't like reading long books. I get bored at this age, I guess. But I wanted it to be, it was for my mother. I wanted it to be an easy read for my mother. And this woman knew a publisher, and she asked to have the manuscript. She said, this is a fabulous story, and I think this should be published.
And the rest is history.
And the rest is history.
It's really amazing how kind of everything kind of came together to publish this book. And meeting that person on the beach and sharing the manuscripts. It's almost like out of like a story, like everything just came together so beautifully.
It did. It really did. Yes.
So the title itself, I love the title, Waves of Hope. Can you describe a little bit about how you chose the title?
Okay, my mother used a shortwave radio to listen to Radio Berlin every night, starting in March 1943. Mm-hmm. There was a lot of pressure on the German government to start releasing the names of prisoners of war, American flyer prisoners of war, because as the planes were being shot down, the B-17s and B-24s, mm-hmm. And as our flyers parachuted, those that remained alive, they were captured and put into prison camps. So the German government would not release names, and the Red Cross and others were putting a heavy pressure on them to do that. Americans were really torn, even though Pearl Harbor hit. Everything I've read in the history that I know, Americans were still torn. They did not want to be in another world war. However, they were patriots, and they heard the call and they went in. But the German government was thinking they had a great propaganda machine. For those of you that study German history or Nazis, the Americans were being told, as was my mother, don't believe what you hear, mm-hmm. and don't trust anything you hear, because it's all propaganda. But my mother decided she was going to look into this. She had heard from an old World War I veteran mm-hmm. that he told her that if you listen to Radio Berlin, they're just starting to release names every night, 5 names. And they would say, Ron Negra, Nutley, New Jersey. My mother would write that down and use the shortwave, use her penmanship, letters and postcards to write to the family to tell them that she heard the name of their loved one, and she was writing to say they're alive. And that was quite extraordinary, because I can't imagine what the families went through. If you read the letters, it brings it home, of course. But I can't imagine what I would do. So emotional over having my child or my husband or my family member missing in action. Some of the families were told they were missing in action. Other families were not told. So the beginning of the book, the title, getting back to your question, was Waves.
Yeah.
And my mother, so shortwave radio, and my mother was so taken by the emotions that many of the letters expressed hope.
Yes.
The responses back to her after she notified them, my mother said she tried to communicate hope to these families, to say there's hope, your loved one is alive. The letters that she received back, which was a total surprise to her, she never expected to receive over 200 letters back. They expressed anxiety, fear, but they also expressed hope. So that's where the word hope came from, the waves of hope.
And you were saying that she was able to listen to the names, and then also the prisoners of war, they listed their addresses. And that's how,
Yes.
that's how
Well, many of them said Joe Smith, Wichita, Kansas.
Yeah.
And some of them would give the address, but they'd be stopped from giving the full address. And again, this is that German control of the captives. But where she could, if she heard a street name, she put it down. However, back in those days, thank God for our postal service, because they delivered the letters to the name and the town or the city.
If you look at the return address, it just says Ruth Johnson, Fredericktown, Ohio, and that would get delivered, because back in those days, you didn't need, your whole address, the zip code, and everything else that you do today.
I wanted to mention, Nicholas, if you look at the letters, because I've been asked about this from so many people from around the country, around the world. As they read the letters, they said, gee, those letters are addressed to August D. Negra or Mr. Negra. Why is that? Going back to the times now, and I hate to say it this way, but it's true, women didn't carry as much credibility in their name as a man's name. And my mother knew that. And she did not want, because of the propaganda issue that was going on, and Americans being warned, be careful what you're hearing and who you're hearing it from. And there were a couple of women, American women back then, that were finally arrested, but it took a while, that were sending out all kinds of propaganda. And that motivated my mother to sign the letters with my father's name. She felt that his name would add more credibility. It's hard for us to understand that today. Well, maybe it isn't based upon our recent history. But, that was my first thing. I said, Mom, why would you just use Dad's name and not yours? And that was her answer to me. She was very concerned about not having the credibility that my father's name would, or a man's name.
And as time went on, though, she began to use her own name. Later on, when she was writing letters, did she ever use her own name?
Yes, later, 1944, because people were saying to her, you've done this a lot. I mean, you have a lot of these communications. You've got some credibility here. She was contacted by a woman in Ohio who she was also writing letters to prisoner of war families, and she tried to form a group. This woman did not want to miss a name. And it was very difficult. You got to remember, my sister she was an infant, and my mother was writing letters, worrying about taking care of my sister, putting her down or in bed or whatever. So she may have missed some nights, even though she tried not to. But she wrote over 300 letters, I know that. And the return was, for anybody that's on the marketing side or research side, the return of letters back to her really astonished us. It exceeded her expectations. But she started then using her name because people said, you've got credibility here. The woman in Ohio wrote to her, and I have that letter. She said, I want you to join a group that I've put together, and I want everyone to have an assignment. So Agnes Joan Negra, you have Monday and Tuesday. And Bill Smith, you have Wednesday. And Mary, you have Thursday. They didn't want to miss a name.
Yeah.
But it were only 5 names given every night. They never deviated from that. The Germans, they always kept to those 5 names.
No, and then just the dedication that your mom had to take time out of her day, take time out of her night to notate those names. It's a selfless act, to do that, and then to mail these letters to let people know that their loved ones are okay. It's a beautiful act that she did that. We talked a little bit about some of the letters focused, but let's see. I guess maybe now might be a good time to show some of those letters. I was able to bring up a couple on a Google slide show. So I'm just going to share my screen here so everyone can take a look at some of the letters. Let's make sure this is working okay. Can everybody see that?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, excellent. So before we do that, I just wanted to just share this beautiful photo of Ron's mom and dad. Agnes and August Negra. And Ron, can you tell me a little bit about the photo?
Yeah, my dad was in Stark, Florida, ready to ship out to Europe. And he called my mother and said, get on a bus or a train with Patty, my sister, and just come down as soon as possible. I want to see you. And she did that. I can't imagine traveling again with a young kid like that back in those days. This was Christmas Day, the day before he shipped out to England to war. And mom said, please don't show that picture. I wasn't smiling. I said, well, Mom, under the circumstances, I think people would understand why you weren't smiling. So that's Stark, Florida, Camp Stark, Florida. Still there, by the way. Mel and I drove through it a couple of years ago on the way to our place in Florida, where we were going in Florida. And it really hasn't changed from what a lot of people told me from the 1940s.
I see the palm tree in the background.
Yeah.
Yep.
So there are a few letters that I wanted to highlight, and you can purchase a book on Amazon, on Barnes and Noble's website, IndieBound, and also the library has a copy too. So you can always stop by and view a copy of the book with all the letters. But there were a few letters that I really liked, and I thought I'd highlight them here. This one is from 1943, May 14th, and the letter reads, I want to thank you for your kindness and letting me know of the whereabouts of my husband, First Lieutenant Nicholas R. Drake, who is now a captive in a prison camp in Germany. I have received word that he was missing in action in North Africa, and I assure you that your message was very welcome. Now my mind is at ease in regard to his welfare. Sincerely, Mrs. Drake. And I think of the title, The Waves of Hope, and how this letter that this person received was hope, that their loved one is even though they're captured, they're alive, and there's hope that they're going to come back home. There's some other ones here too, and as everyone can, I'm sure everyone can see the screen. So, but this one is from May 12th, 1943. This was what Ron discussed earlier, where Agnes used August's name. Dear Mr. Negra, I wish to thank you for writing to me, giving me the news of my first Lieutenant Joseph E. Casamongo. I have been notified over a month ago that he was missing, so you can understand how relieved we feel now. Assuring you that my wife and I appreciate your kindness. I am yours very sincerely, Edwin Casamongo. And there's letters, Ron, how many letters are featured in the book?
75.
75. So here's just some other ones here. So you really get a beautiful collection of all these letters together. Very good overview of them.
That's the one that's got the quote that's on the back of the book. There's the picture of Mom and Dad, and then there's a quote there. When we were going through the letters, I said to Ron, this reminds me of, this quote reminds me of something that someone would write, if they were writing a screenplay for a movie. Mm-hmm. As long as there are Americans like you who are doing such wonderful work and giving such wonderful service to our fellow Americans, I'm sure victory will be ours. And you can be sure you and others like you have played a vital part. I mean, I can remember watching movies from the 1940s, hearing them say things like that. It just really got to me. So that's why, we put it on the back of the book as a quote.
It's a great quote, and it sums up the book very well.
Yeah.
What's amazing to me, Nicholas? Mm-hmm. You should see the letters we're getting now. I mean, mm-hmm. It sounds like these letters for people that have read the book, ordered and read the book. They're telling us things that are just really wonderful comments. Yes. Here's a woman by the name of Susan Hunter. She said, American heroes are around us disguised as ordinary looking people. Mm-hmm. This just came in the other day. Turn off the dreadful news and grab some uplifting books, Waves of Hope. Here's a fascinating story of a woman, 101 years old, still with us, who learned of POWs via shortband radio and wrote to the families of these POWs during World War II to let them know their husbands and sons were still alive. Her name is Agnes Joan Negra, and thank you for giving us the book, sending us the book. Anyway, we're still getting, and Val is capturing all these now. Interesting comments from people.
You know, Ron did the book for his mother for her 100th birthday, but of course, Agnes is going to live to 110. So what do you do for the 101st birthday after, you did the book? So we talked about it, and I decided to do pictures in an album. This is the second album already.
Oh, wow.
Of people that read the book and then took a selfie of themselves with it, or someone took a picture of them, which is an idea that I stole from a friend of mine, and sent us their picture. But when they sent me the picture through the email, they would write, this incredible story about my father was in the war, I loved it. So what I did was, instead of just putting the picture, I have the picture, like this is that woman that Ron just read out to you. Here's, I don't know if you could see it, but here's her pictures that she sent. But then down below, I have her story of what she wrote about it. And we presented Mom with a book, an album for her 101st birthday. And now so many people have sent them that I'm still working on it. So if anyone purchased the book or is going to purchase the book, I will give you my email, or actually you could even get it from Ron's website, and just, send me a picture of yourself with the book and anything that you might want to say. I mean, this is a radio show that we were on in Alabama, and everything I'm documenting into this book. I even have Bernie Sanders in there with his them. But I think and it's great for Mom. She just looks through this every day. Here's Negra cousins.
We could have given my mother, I don't know, something, and it wouldn't mean as much as this book, these books that Val's been creating and developing for her. She just sits there every day and goes through and says, "Oh my gosh, there's so-and-so. When did you talk to them last?" I said, "Mom, I haven't seen him in 50 years. Yeah. He wrote us a note. I asked him to send a picture, and there it is." So she is just very, very emotionally moved by this.
She can see who bought it. She can't believe it. She keeps telling me, "I can't believe that everyone has the book. And I can't believe they're writing these, wonderful things to me." And I'm telling you, I'm almost at the end of book 2, and I still have pictures. So I'm thinking that there's going to be definitely an album 3, maybe more.
With the book itself, how long did it take to put the book together? When did you start? In celebration of your mom's 100th birthday, did you start like a year prior to that? Like, how long did it take for the book to all come into fruition?
The answer is yes. I had a couple of puddles in the road along the way. I had a little eye issue, so I couldn't coordinate it like I wanted to and write it. So about a year. It took about a year. But she was think about interviewing someone that has so much information, so much knowledge. I just want to give you a quick example, okay? I said to my mom, describe the day of Pearl Harbor. Tell me your day and Dad's day. They were newlyweds. And she said the tradition was they went to church, Holy Family Church, and 11 o'clock mass. That was it, not 12, 11. And after mass, they went to my grandmother and grandfather Negra's house. And the tradition was, my father was one of 4 brothers. He was the youngest. They would all go there with 2 of them were not married. One was with a child, and my mother and father. And my mother found out she was pregnant that beginning of November, and she hadn't told anybody. So her intention was to go to church that day, Pearl Harbor, and then to announce that she was pregnant after dinner. Well, after dinner, the men went into the parlor to listen to the New York Giants Brooklyn Dodgers football game. And I said to my mother, Mom, I know your memory's great and you never tell a lie, but the Brooklyn Dodgers was a baseball team. Why would you talk about them playing the Giants in football? She said, Ron, they were a football team then as well. So I just got to push that to the side. She said, Ron, trust me. So I Googled it, and sure enough, they did have a football team and they did play the Giants that day. So the men were in the room. The women were starting dessert and doing the dishes in the kitchen. And the men were listening to the game, and there was the broadcast was interrupted for only about a minute. And it said, we have an announcement to make. Pearl Harbor, Hawaii was bombed by the Japanese, and there are many loss of lives. And they went right back to the game. Yeah. And all the men sat there, wondering why they wouldn't break away, but they didn't have any news. They didn't have any information. WR came back after the game then and did their broadcast. But in the meantime, and this is a great story too, there was a little boy down the street that came running down the street to my grandparents' house. His name was Jerry Messina. And he ran in the house and he said, hurry up, my father said, put on CBS or NBC radio. They're announcing all about Pearl Harbor. They're killing people in Pearl Harbor. And so they did. And that's how they learned about that. So my mother never made the announcement that she was pregnant, newly pregnant. And they were so consumed by the news because frankly, and my mother admits this, she said half the people didn't know where Pearl Harbor was. Unless you had a Navy contact in some way that was stationed there, they really didn't know much about Pearl Harbor. So now fast forward, Jerry Messina. When I was at Johnson & Johnson, I was establishing a new office in Connecticut in a commercial building. It wasn't owned by J&J. So I was leasing that building for the Eastern division of a company, one of the J&J companies. And a guy came in and he was doing the same thing. And he came over and introduced himself. And he said, my name is Jerry Messina. Now, this Jerry Messina, that was his father that came and ran to the house. Yeah. He was born and raised in another town in Nutley, outside Nutley. He never knew anything about Nutley. He wasn't born in his family had moved away from Nutley, that kind of thing. But occasionally I would hear the name. My mother would say, oh yeah, this young kid, Jerry Messina, came running. He was all excited. Yeah. And I just lodged the name in the back of my mind. So this guy introduced himself as Jerry Messina. And I said to him, by any chance? And he said, that was my father. My grandparents lived near your grandparents. And I was the guy that ran in and was so excited about Hawaii and Pearl Harbor. It was really ironic. So I left that office about a year later. He was there. I had no contact with him. And that was 1985. We got a note the other day from Jerry Messina. He saw my book somewhere. Wow. He lives in Connecticut. And he read my book and wrote us a nice note, reliving our experiences and all that stuff. So it really came full circle. And then we got a call from the Asbury Park Press. And Val took the call, and this guy called up and he said, I'd like to do a story on Mrs. Negra and Ron. Yeah. He said, my name is Jerry Messina. Huh. Wow. Excuse me. Not the same guy. Okay. Just the coincidences just keep coming along, So.
Funny thing about Mom's, just wanted to mention about the broadcast with Mom's memory.
Oh, I wanted to talk about that.
When Ron was interviewing her, she was at that point not quite 100, but 99, going to be 100, and you're thinking about, is she remembering this correctly? Of course, we know she's got a mind like a steel trap, but did she remember everything perfectly well? After the book came out, someone told me about a place in Wall Township called Info Age. And it's all about radio operators, and it's Marconi, and you take the book there, they would be interested in it because you can see shortwave radios there and so forth. So anyway, long story short, we went there. They wanted the book, they wanted to see us, and we toured through their museums in Info Age. And the curator, Ray Chase, said to me and Ron, come down and let's go to the parlor. We have a parlor set up for, like the 1940s. So we walked down and there's a room with a couch and doilies and Cathedral Radio. And we sat down and he said, would you like to hear the newscast?
The actual broadcast.
The broadcast of the Pearl Harbor invasion.
WOR.
And we said, absolutely. Well, for Ron, it was like sitting with his mother at his grandfather's house listening to the radio, because it was exactly what his mother said. They interrupted the
Giants
Dodgers football game. And, Ron said to Ray after that, I've been telling my mother that she was wrong. And she keeps telling me, no, I'm not. I know what I heard. So that was really spooky, actually hearing what she had told him.
The shortwave radio, there's an interesting story too of how your mom obtained the shortwave radio. I was reading in the book about a World War I vet that he gave the radio to your family.
Yes, he lived on Gless Avenue in Nutley, and he was an older guy that used to walk past my grandparents' house. He knew my grandparents at my parents' house, and he heard about the radio broadcast from Berlin, and he said to my mother, told my mother the story, and my father, who hadn't gone yet, who haven't left here for service yet, and he said, I have a shortwave radio. Would you like it? And they were intrigued by it.
Yeah.
And the shortwave radio that's in the book is the one that he gave my parents.
Here's Ron and his sister. Sorry, Ron. In front of the actual shortwave radio. My sister-in-law doesn't like her outfit, but I said, I don't think anybody cares.
You don't still have that radio, do you?
No,
we don't. We don't.
I wish we did.
We went to InfoAge though, and they have it there.
Yeah, they
not that one, but
it was
similar.
Yeah.
We were on one of these Zoom things and you always have a technical person there, in the background somewhere, and he said, what was the make and model of the shortwave radio? And we figured these old timers at InfoAge will have that nailed down, I'm sure. So we contacted them, and they came back with a full description,
it's a
model number, when it was built, when it was
Oh,
1940.
my goodness.
It was the premier unit, that kind of thing.
And they were telling us at InfoAge, which was, I found interesting too, is that after a bit, the FBI would send people to houses, and they would take out the component of the shortwave where Americans could send messages there, because they weren't sure who was doing what. They could only get them in. So I said, no, Ron said, no, his mother was never contacted by the FBI, but they were actually doing that.
They don't make radios as good as they used to. I mean, I'm sure if you listen to the Philco, probably still sounds just as good.
It does. It did. It was wonderful.
Let's see. I just wanted to ask a little bit about your father and your uncle's service during World War II. When they were listening to the football game, I was very patriotic that they all wanted to enlist in the military and help us out. Can you talk a little bit about their service?
His brother John was already in the Army Air Corps, and he was home on his first leave. And he was sitting there listening to it. And my mother said he became very emotional and angry that he wanted to go back as soon as possible. And he was a gunner on a B-17 airplane. He was shot down over Yugoslavia on his 39th mission, I believe. Yugoslavia, the Nazis had their engine factories there for their airplanes. And this was a mission to bomb some of those factories. And his plane was shot down. So he parachuted 20,000 feet, captured, was rescued by the Yugoslavian underground and hidden out for 3 months. So my grandparents, his parents, only got a telegram that he was missing in action.
Yeah.
And they knew nothing else. My father's brother, Anthony, was not in the military at the time, but he ran down right after the announcement, and he joined the Army. He became a tank commander in Africa, Sicily, Italy, and then he was in Patton's 7th Army, and then he joined Patton's 3rd Army as they marched into France and Paris. And then it was my father who tried to enlist in the Navy. He felt that because of Pearl Harbor, that many sailors had died.
Yes.
And he went down and he went through the whole process. Now, my father was never diagnosed as a diabetic because they didn't do that back then, but he had diabetes, and they all knew that there was something going on. And he also had malaria. And he also, anyway, he went down, he joined the Navy, and they put him through the whole process. And at some point they walked in and they said, "You can't be in the Navy. We have to release you because you're colorblind." Now he waited. They were not taking anyone whose either wife was pregnant or had a baby. So he waited until my sister, I think, was 12 months or 13 months before he went in. The Navy said someone will be contacting you. And my father was very concerned that the Army was going to call him up and say, "Okay, you're going here." So he joined the Army. And after training, he went to Paris, was wounded at the battle, not Paris, but France, wounded at the Battle of the Bulge. And that's a whole different story. That's another book, I guess. And then was in the Army until he was released March 1946. Just a side story of that, my mother was at the train station, for anybody that knows Newark, Penn Station. And the day that he came home by train from I forgot the name of it, Fort Meade in Maryland. That's where he was shipped to from overseas. And my mother's biggest concern that day was, well, her first concern was, what were his wounds like? Will he be seen as a wounded soldier? The second was she had my sister.
Yes.
Who was 5 at the time. And she was very concerned my sister wouldn't recognize him or go to him. And she didn't. She was fearful. She didn't know him, And that took a little while for that bond to take place, but eventually did.
It must, I mean, I can't imagine all the emotions going through what your mom experienced and the other families, seeing loved ones come back after being at war for a few years, just the emotions that everyone must have felt.
Well, the emotions of the families, not of the unknown. That was probably the biggest thing. Not only the emotions once they got home, but what were the emotions like when they were gone?
Yeah.
Especially those that were missing and not heard of. Can I just tell you the side story about Mr. McCann?
Of course, please.
The mailman. This is great. My mother said Mr. McCann had a big whistle, and he was our mailman, or their mailman. And he would walk around, and he had a relationship with the Negra family. He loved my grandmother's chocolate chip cookies, and he used to stop on his route and stop in there, and she'd give him a cookie. So anyway, he just loved the family, and they had a great relationship with him. Anyway, my mother would wait until she heard a whistle, and the whistle meant that there was a letter there from my father, or maybe one of her brothers who didn't have a chance. They were both in the service too, but one was in the Navy in espionage, and he was on a hill in a mountain in China, reporting back Japanese ships, but he couldn't get mail out. And the other brother was in the Merchant Marine. He was the baby, and he was 17. He lied going in to get into the Merchant Marine. So he was going back and forth in the Atlantic, hoping that his ship wasn't going to, delivering supplies and stuff. But every once in a while, a letter kind of snuck through. Anyway, Mr. McCann would blow the whistle, and that meant that the letter was there from my dad. So she said when they got word that he was wounded and in a hospital, 95th American Army Hospital in France, northeastern France, which had just been liberated. She said she ran down the stairs. She remembers like it was yesterday. He was blowing his whistle, and they both were jumping up and down like it was New Year's Eve, hugging each other because the letter came to say that he was alive.
And I was reading the letter was in French. And
yes, my father's French nurse.
Yeah,
and they would not release mail out of this hospital, field hospital, because of security reasons. A lot of the area was still controlled. It was the Battle of the Bulge, so there were still a lot of German soldiers around, but they wouldn't release the mail because they were afraid that someone would find out about this hospital and it would be bombed or whatever. So my dad was in there 44 days, and just prior to the 44-day mark, he said to the nurse, "You have to get a letter out to my wife. She doesn't know if I'm alive or not." And somehow she did. We don't know how that was, but the letter came in French. My mother got the letter and said, okay, how am I going to get this translated? There weren't a lot of people walking around Harrison Street that spoke French, by the way. So she remembered that my dad had French for 2 years in Nutley High School. And he had a teacher by the name of Helen Gerdnick, who I eventually had when I was at Nutley High School, but I knew nothing about this story. So she brought the letter to Nutley High. Mrs. Gerdnick translated the letter. And she said, Mrs. Gerdnick looked up and said, your husband's alive. He's in a hospital in France. That's how she found out that he was alive.
You know, I take it's so easy for granted. If I wanted something to translate, go on the internet, go to Google Translate 1, 2, 3. But I can't imagine what that must have felt like receiving a letter in French, not knowing how to easily translate it, but then finally discovering that, oh, thank God, my husband's okay. You know, that my loved one's okay. So it must have been a relief.
My dad used to speak French at the table when I was growing up. You know, passez-moi du pain, that kind of thing. Yeah. And he'd tell me something, you know, and I'd say, Dad, can't you just ask me in English? But thank goodness that he took French in high school, because when he was rescued and ended up hiding in a Belgian house, which only spoke French, the Belgians only spoke French, he was able to communicate with them, or at least partially communicate, you know. So it really helped him a lot. The thing that got me was that I had Miss Gerdnick, that was her first or second year teaching at Nutley High School. She was a young teacher, lived on the enclosure. It was interesting to me was that when I took French, I would walk into her classroom and she'd say hello to me, you know, in French. And she would say hi to your father. Yeah. And you know, I used to sit there and go, how the heck does she know my father? You know, he never told me the story. My mother never told me until we started preparing the book.
It's amazing the differences. And, you know, I have to mention to you that Agnes went from writing these letters, and by the way, she still writes letters. She loves to write letters, but she went from writing these letters, and for her 100th birthday, she got an iPad. And now she actually knows how to work the iPad. She does email, and it's like amazing to us that, you know, she has, imagine where she came from, you know, to this point. And you were saying about translating. I went on my iPhone the other day and I downloaded a new program, and it said, now you have translate. What language do you want to translate from? And I thought back to that time period. I mean, they had you couldn't Google anything. I mean, they didn't even have a TV, they had a radio. So it's just amazing, you know, the transformation and the transformation that she's seen. You know, now she's actually emailing people.
And she's getting emails from people. I don't know how they're getting her email address. I've given it out to some people, but she's getting emails from people around the country. She's going, who's this guy? How does he find, how do I know him? So I'll read, and that's real pleasant type of comments, you know. Where did I meet him? I said, Mom, you never met him. I don't even know who he is. Just don't give him any account information.
Yeah,
you
know? She really doesn't, you know, I think she realizes what she did, but yet on the other hand, she keeps saying, you know, it was just what I thought was right to do, you know, to be kind and help people you know, they were going through what I was going through. And, you know, we keep telling her, Mom, this was a big deal. And she, you know,
she doesn't look at it like that.
She just looks at it as that this is what she did, and she had to do it. You know, she was doing it. That was it.
And roughly, how many letters did she write out to the families?
My mother, I'll tell you how precise she is. She used to make dolls, and she has a log of everyone. She made them from scratch, okay, and sewed their outfits and everything. And she has a log, and she knows exactly how many she made and how many she gave out, okay. She didn't keep a lot. Well, she did partially for the letters, but she believes it was over 300, about 305, 306, 307, somewhere right in there. But she discarded the log years and years ago by accident. And she was really upset over that. We don't really need the log because we can look at the letters that she got back, and that gives us names and addresses, you know, but I lost the ones that she originally sent out.
It's really such a great act that she did that during that time, giving hope to people. We're a little bit about 10 minutes to 3. I want to open up the group here to see if anybody wants to ask any questions.
There are 2 questions I see in the chat, Nick, if I can just interrupt you for 1 second. Amy Bocelli wanted to know, talk about, she got the addresses because the broadcasts were in English. Where the broadcasts were totally in English.
Yes,
Okay.
yes.
And then I got one from Rita Donovan that said, I'll be emailing you for sure. She said her father was in Patton's Third Army and Battle of the Bulge. So anyone that wants my email, if you go on Ron's website, ronaldedwardnegra.com, you can send him a message and he'll send you, my email and, whatever you need to get of mine. Okay, I'm sorry, Nick, go ahead.
Hey, Nick, there are a whole bunch of names here on the right-hand side that I'm seeing. I don't know if your folks
Here, I'll tell
on
you.
here
This
could see
this is Kim.
No, you don't need to do
Right.
that, but I see a whole bunch
Yeah,
of
that's
names
what I
here.
just, that's what I just told
Okay,
him.
all
Yeah,
right, okay.
that's what I,
There's
that's,
questions and-
Kim, those are the
That's all
questions
right.
I just
That's right.
addressed.
Okay.
Yeah.
And
Kim is waving.
if anybody has any questions, you can type them into the
Elaine.
I got it.
I'm having trouble. I'm muting everyone. But if you have any questions, and if people want to buy the book, they can go to Amazon, Barnes and Noble, IndieBound. Also, Ron's website, ronaldedwardnegra.com. You can learn more about the book there.
Yeah. As a side note, Ned, we got a call 2 days ago. It was from a man who was very upset. He said he ordered Waves of Hope and he got another book. There's another book that came out after my book. My book came out September 1 and it's called Waves of Hope. It has nothing to do with this subject matter. But he ordered the book and this other book came and he sees this young couple on the cover of the book and he said, all right, what the heck is this all about? So he was really upset because he just ordered Waves of Hope. He didn't say by Ronald Edward Negra. Now, this book is copyrighted, but you can't copyright the title. You can only copyright the content. So somebody else picked that name and I have no idea why they did it or what they're doing with it.
Well, hopefully, if somebody tries to order that book, they'll get your book instead. So that
That's very good, Nicholas. I didn't think of that.
hopefully that happens. But I'm just checking here. We answered the two questions that were over there. Ronald and Valerie, I want to thank you so much for taking time out of your day to speak to us about this book, and Ron, all the work that you put into this book and to being able to share it with us. It's available to borrow if you like at the library as well. We have a copy, and I love the book, and the way that you described your mother is correct. Reading the book, everything, it just felt like I was there reading the book. It was so descriptive.
Thank you, Nicholas. I really want to thank everyone for their interest here as well. But Nicholas, you've been a pleasure to work with. Thank you for inviting us. The first day you called and said, I'd like to invite you into a Zoom program, really was delightful. So thank you for doing that and for your professionalism. I think you did a great job. And thank you for everybody that tuned in. I see a lot of names here on the right, and I don't know.
Yeah, I'm taking notes.
I don't know where they're at.
Okay, let's just, there's Kathy Pandolfi.
It's okay.
Okay.
We'll do that later. Yeah.
Well, no, they'll be gone later. You'll
That's
be
okay.
able to see them.
That's all right. That's all right. If anybody wants us, they know where we are. Thank you, Nick.
Well, thank you again, and yeah, buy the book. Read the book. It's a great read.